The air in this fancy Wall Street firm was thick with money and cologne, a heady mix that never failed to excite me. Today was interview day, and let's just say my qualifications weren't exactly what they were looking for in that fancy job description. But who needs an MBA when you have a face like mine? Guys couldn't resist a smile from these cherry red lips, and a wiggle in this here pencil skirt could make a grown man forget his own name. So, yeah, the stock market was a mystery to me, but trust me, I had other assets that were pure gold. Douglas Crawford, the big cheese himself, sat behind a mahogany desk that could probably seat a whole family reunion. He wasn't exactly easy on the eyes, with a face like a crumpled newspaper and a suit that looked like it came straight off the rack at a discount store. But hey, a man's looks didn't matter to me as long as his pockets were deep. He barely glanced at my resume before his eyes locked onto mine. Bingo. I batted my lashes, gave him a slow smile that could melt glaciers, and tilted my head just slightly. See? Men were predictable creatures. They all played by the same rules. The interview was a joke. Douglas barely asked me anything about stocks or bonds. Instead, he kept asking me inane questions about my weekend plans and my favorite color. It was getting clear that the only qualification he cared about was my ability to breathe and wear those damn Manolos. As the interview winded down, air quotes very much intended, he leaned back in his chair, his gaze lingering a little too long on the curve of my hip. "Samantha," he drawled, his voice like gravel in a blender. "Let's just say I think you have a lot of potential." I knew exactly where this was going. A smirk played on my lips. "Do I, Mr. Crawford?" I purred, leaning forward just enough to give him a generous view down my blouse. His Adam's apple bobbed in his throat, and for a second, I thought he might faint. "Look," he finally managed, clearing his throat. "This position requires a certain understanding. Maybe you could, prove yourself?" Bingo again. I stood up, smoothing down the skirt that was already clinging way too perfectly. "Mr. Crawford," I said, my voice a husky whisper. "I think I can be very persuasive." The next 10 minutes were a blur of ripped fabric, frantic fumbling, and the unmistakable scent of desperation clinging to Douglas like a cheap aftershave. It wasn't exactly a scene out of a romance novel, but hey, it got the job done. By the time we were both catching our breaths, a satisfied smile stretched across my face. Douglas straightened his tie, a sheepish look on his face. "Welcome aboard, Samantha," he mumbled. Job secured. No pesky stock market knowledge required. Just a little light persuasion on my part. The salary was a dream. 15 grand a month for basically showing up and keeping Douglas happy. Happy how, you might ask? Well, let's just say my new boss had a newfound appreciation for the power of a red dress and a well-timed smile. Maybe this Wall Street thing wouldn't be so bad after all. Working at Crawford & Partners was a breeze. My days were spent sipping lattes, gossiping with the secretaries, and strategically placing myself in Douglas's path. He couldn't resist a strategically placed hair flip or a well-timed accidental bump into his office door. Promotions and bonuses practically rained down on me, much to the silent disapproval of the other women in the office. Their judgmental stares bounced right off my perfectly manicured nails. They slaved away with their MBAs and briefcases while I conquered the boardroom with a killer smile. But Douglas, like that tube top from last year, was starting to feel a little too familiar. My sights were set higher, way higher. Mr. Timur Petrov, the elusive CEO on the 57th floor, was the real prize. He was a mountain of a man with a brooding gaze and a reputation as ruthless as he was successful. Just the kind of challenge I craved. Getting close to him was a game. I volunteered for the year-end party planning committee, knowing there would be a meeting with the big cheese himself. As expected, Mr. Petrov strolled into the conference room, his presence sending shivers down everyone's spine, except mine. After the meeting, I lingered behind, pretending to have forgotten a document. "Mr. Petrov," I purred, "I believe you dropped this." I bent down to pick up a non-existent pen, giving him a generous view down my low-cut dress. His dark eyes narrowed, and a slow smile spread across his face. It was a different kind of smile than Douglas's. Predatory, dangerous. "Perhaps," he said, his voice a low rumble, "there's another meeting we can discuss?" His office on the 57th floor was a monument to power and wealth. The meeting quickly turned into a whirlwind of silk and urgency. He devoured me with a passion that made Douglas's fumbling attempts look like child's play. Later, walking back to my desk on a cloud nine, I knew I wasn't going back. Douglas was history. My new title? Mr. Petrov's executive assistant. The work was simple: signing documents, answering calls, and keeping him happy. The documents themselves were a blur of legalese and financial jargon. I never bothered to read them, content to bask in the reflected power of my new position. My signature became the golden key that unlocked deals worth millions. It all came crashing down one Tuesday morning. The FBI swarmed the office like angry hornets, their eyes fixed on me. Timur, it seemed, had vanished, leaving me holding the bag, or rather the signed documents. All those signatures I'd so carelessly dispensed with were now evidence of my involvement in his insider trading scheme. The expensive gifts and sudden influx of cash into my bank account didn't help my case either. My carefully crafted life, built on nothing but beauty and manipulation, crumbled to dust. From the penthouse suite of stolen success, I was plummeting, with no Manolos to soften the fall. The system I'd gamed for so long had finally turned the tables on me. In the end, my beauty, the very weapon I'd wielded with such arrogance, had blinded me to the true cost of playing a dangerous game.